This is Gemara Zevachim Daf Chaf Vav, the daf for Cholamayid Sukkis, and once again we try to get these dafim up as everyone can learn in their leisure, preparing for all the incredible Yom Tovim. We are 4 lines into the wide lines as we continue discussing whether the avir of the kli has the din of the kli or not. A little bit of a reminder back to our Mesechus Shabbos days many moons ago. All the learning should be an incredible schos. Refuah Shalema for Gabriel Simcha ben Miriam Ahuva Be'esoich Sha'ar Chayle Yisrael. So we begin with a statement of Amar Rav Chia, Amar Rav Yechlan, Zoisei Maris. Based on that which we just said, Avir Kli Kli Dami, the airspace of a vessel as a din of the vessel itself. Amar Rav Zia Rav Chia Barabba, V'dilma B'shaiseis. Maybe the water is trickling. Maybe he's not going through any airspace. Again, we're talking about a case where we have water flowing down a mountain. We have a kli. The water has to get into the kli. So the Gemara said you divert to the water with your hand, with another means, and then it goes into the kli. So Rav Chia, Amar Rav Yechlan, we began today by assuming that when the water goes down, makes a little bit of an upward motion to get into the kli, l'chayra, it was in the air for a moment. L'chayra, there's an element of avir, and there always is a raya that avir kli has the din of a kli. Rav Zera responded, how do you know? Maybe it's talking about dilma b'shaisis, that it's dribbling down, that it's trickling down, and it's never in the airspace for a moment. Amar le Rav Chia spy tarda, crazy person. Tanan. What did the Mishnah say? The water should go into, should pass over into a chavis, which clearly implies going over into the chavis, that it goes through a bit of the airspace. Continues the Gemara of Amar Rav Chia Barabba, Amar Rav Yechlan. Me'idusei shel Rav Tzadok nishnis mishnazu. From the Eidos of Rav Tzadok, we learned this Mishnah that's not. Hey, Rav Tzadok ala zeichlin, with regard to the running spring, shekilchan bali agoizin, that so enchanneled the spring with walnut leaves, that what was he made? Shehein ksherim, zehaya maisa b'halaya. This was a case in a place called Ahalaya. Uba maisa l'nechachamim b'lishkas agazis v'chshiru, and they said that it is kosher. So says the Gemara that these waters will be kosher, they'll still be called mayim chayim. And we continue with a third, bringing us back to our original sugya of Kabbalah Sadam. Omar Rav Zira, Omar Rav Hatzirem Oizen Hapar V'achar Kach Kibol Damai. If someone nicks the ear of the par, and then afterward caught the blood, pasal, the loch is it's pasal. Shene'amar v'lokach midam hapar. Should take from the blood of the blar, which teaches us par shahaya kvar. It has to be the par that was, and if the par now gets a mum, gets a nick, and that's part of the dam, it's going to invalidate the carbon. Ask the Gemara, Ashkan kachi 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 kalim in Allah. That pasuk is only by kachi kachim. But how do you know the same is going to be true by kachi kalim? Amar Rava says Tamim Zachar. Amar Rava Tani, we learned in a brayso said Tamim Zachar ben Shana. That's the pasuk, and from there we darshin says Tamim ben Shana, that it should be unblemished, it should be a tam for 1 year, b'shas shchita. But b'kabbalah v'aylacha b'zrika minayin, we only know it has to be tam at the moment of the shchita. How do we know also by the other critical avodas? Tamalemer yeh kol be'avyasai lo yehu alatam uben shana. This shows us everything. Kol avyasav has to be when it is complete and within year 1, and therefore even if it was completed till the shchita, that is not going to suffice. All carbon is in the Torah. Shenishtayer mehen k'zas basar k'zais chalav. Chalev, if you leave over k'zais of meat or k'zais of the forbidden fats, zirek es adam, the halacha is you're still allowed, even though you were not allowed to leave anything over. If you did, you're still allowed to be zirek the dam, throw the blood in the mizbeach, and the carbon is still going to be kosher. So says the Gemara, if we're talking about that only thing that is left is the k'zais of dam, certainly the carbon has mumim. Certainly it's not tamim anymore. It's not complete. And yet the Brisa says you still could do the zrika, not like we just said that it's going to be possible. Tergama ben Shana says the Gemara, we must say that Brisa is referring to only within the first year. I asked the Gemara, what's going on over here? You're splitting the necessity for a ben Shana, for the age of the carbon. Only b'shas shchita, but not b'shas the rest of the carbon. Amar Rava says, Rava say meres, shois, poislois b'carbon. Kachim. Says Rava, yes, indeed. You know, we see from here, we hear that hours, shois, passel up by carbonis, that it once is past the year mark, then it's going to start having different psulim. Amar Ravami, Amar Rav on the last line. He bifnim v'ragla b'chotz. If the carbon is within the chotzer, but the ragleho, the legs of the animal, are outside. Chotach v'achar shochat ksheira. If you cut off the legs and then did the shchita, the halacha is it is kosher. Shachat v'achar chotach. If he did the shchita and then cut off the legs, then pasal, it will be pasal. So says the Gemara, the chalik is going to be when the shchita was done and when the ragleho were severed. Asks the Gemara, 1 second. Chavav Amud Aleph. Chotach v'achar kach. Shachat is ksheira. How could that be? Balmum. If it's a balmum, you cut off. When you're bringing the actual carbon, you already cut off the legs before the shechita. It should be possible. Ella says Gemara Ema. Rather, you know what this means. Chotach v'achar kach kabals ksheira. Kiba v'achar chotach is going to be psula. But wait, says the Gemara in the 4th line. Chotach v'achar kibul is ksheira. V'amar Rav Zira atzeir ma'izin b'v'char. If so nicks the air, cuts the ear of the bachar, v'achar kibul damai is possible. Shenemar v'lachem damah par. Parshay yakvar. We see you can't do as we just suggested. So rather, says the Gemara 8 lines down, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Ravimi, Chaytech be'ever, ad shemigia le'etzem. If someone cuts through the limb until he reaches the bone, doesn't cut through the bone, then the carbon is going to remain a tam. It's going to remain without any mumim, and that will be the case we're talking about. Kibel v'achach chotach. It's going to be psula. Shmas mina dama muvla bevarim has a din of damu. Maybe the reason is because of the fat. Says the Gemara, no. Shmas mina koche kalim koche shmas mina bisar koche kalim shatzal neizrikas adam is psasal dilma v'koche says the Gemara. So not necessarily is there a perfect rayu. We continue with the Brisa. Continues the Gemara, where are the shchitas to be done? Tana Rabbana, kachi shchitas b'asafain. Kibul damim b'li sharis b'asafain. Amad b'adaraim, let's say you're standing b'adaraim. V'shid yadei l'atsafain v'shachat. Then the shchita is considered to be done b'atsafain, and kshira, it's going to be kosher. But kibilasai. But if you do the same for the Kabbalah, psula, it's going to be possible. Continues the Brisa. Hechlis roshvuba kielu nechlas kuloi. If part of his body, part of his head are into the right area, then it's as if his entire body is there, and therefore the avoid will be kosher. Pirkisa v'yatzisa l'daraim v'chazra kshira. If the animal bound, thrashed around, and it went from Daraim to Safai, north to south, and then came back to where it's supposed to be, it is kosher. Continues the Brisa. Kache kalim shchidasai bifnim. Inside the chotzer he will damam b'kli sharis bifnim. Amad b'chotzer chlis yadei lifnim. You're standing outside and put your hand inside. V'shachat shchidasai kshira. Now the same thing as we just said a moment ago. Kaval kival lasei psula. Hechlis reisha v'ruba kival nechnas. Perchas aviyatza lachotz lachazar psula. Says the Gemara, Shema Mina. What do we see from this last thing? Basar kache kalim sheyatza lefnei zrikas damim psulim. If the dam went outside before the zrika, it parcels up the carbon. Says Gemara, whoa, why? Dilma. Baal yav yoseres hakavid. Maybe the Brisa means the tail, the diaphragm, and the shtei klayos, and the two kidneys. Maybe that's what it means. They are puzzle. It does not mean that the basar, it does not mean that the regular parts of the carbon are puzzle, but maybe only these parts are going to be puzzle. So, Baiminei, Avu Adishmo Mishmuel, he bifnim ragle bachot mahu, Amar le, Ksev Aviyom Nashem, Ashtei Kula lefnim, Talav Shachat Mahu. What if one hung up a carbon in the air and shechted it? What's the halach? Amr like shira. Amr le yishtabeshta. You made a mistake. You need shchita al yarech v'leka. You need shchita to be done next to the mizbeach, and if the animal is hanging in the air, it is not considered next to the mizbeach. Nitla v'shachat ma'u. But what if not if the animal was hung up? What if the shoichet was suspended and he performed the shchita? Amr le psula. You're wrong. No one ever said the sheikhet has to be next to mizbeach liver. It's going to be kosher. Nila v'kibel mau. On a similar vein, continues the Gemara. What if you're hanging and you did the kabbalah sadam? Amalek sheira. Amalek shtabeshta ein derech sheiras bekach. This is not the way of sheiras. This is not the normal way of performing, and therefore it's going to be pasul. Tala v'kibel mahu. Now, what if he suspended the animal and did kabbalah sadam? Amrei psula, amrei shtabishta, shchit al yerech v'loi kabbalah al yerech. Amar Abaye, says Abaye regarding these four cases. Bekache kachem kulam psulais. Bar, it's all going to be apostle except for benitla v'shachat. Except for the case where the person himself was hanging when he did the shchita. That's one case that's going to be kosher. Bekache kalim, kulan kishirais, bar minitla v'kibel. They're all going to be kosher except for where he was suspended when he did the Kabbalah. Amar Rava, Maishna Tala v'kibel bekache kalim dikshira, says Rava Tabaye. What are you? I don't get it. Why by kache kalim Tala v'kibel is kosher? Davir bifnim givnim dami. You cause the avir of the chatzar is like being in the chatzar. Kache kachem nami avir safan kisava dami. So what's the chilik? Elam Rava on the fourth white line. So rather Rava argues. Bein kache kachem bein kachem kalim, says Rava. Says Rava, in both cases are going to be kosher. Bar, what's the one case not? Mintola v'shachat. Except for the case where the animal is hanging and he did the shchita, bekache kachim. Nitla v'kibel ben kache kalim. If the kaim was suspended, both bekache kalim, that case is as well going to be the exception to the rule, and that case is going to be possible. So, if he's inside, but his tzitzis, and over here Rashi explains what does it mean tzitzisai. Rashi, about 5 lines to the bottom, says tzitzis roishai, tainu saroi. It means his hair. His hair is outside. What is the din? Is the hair going to parcel it up or not? Shtavai kulu lefnim, hachinami, so to over here, it all has to be brought to the oil made, and therefore, if his hair is not there, it is not going to work. We continue with the mission on the bottom of Chavav Amid Aleph. Nosnoi al gabe hakevesh, and the kohen put the blood on the ramp of the mizbeach, shlo keneged hayisoid, not opposite the base of the mizbeach. V'nosan es anis, v'nosan es anitonin lemato lemalo, and he put without should have been below, above, or v'saniton lemalo lemato, that should have been above, below. V'saniton b'fnim b'achos, and done b'achos b'fnim, meaning he messed up on where the dam was placed. Halacha is pasul, but ve'ein boy karis. So we segue now into the halachas of the zrikas hadam, the nesinas hadam, where it's supposed to be placed. What happens when it's placed incorrectly? So we turn over to Chavav Beis, and the Gemara begins with a memra of Shmuel. Amar Shmuel pasul basar. The meat is pasul to be eaten. Aval bailim nischapru. But in these cases, Rashi points out, we're talking about the case of the Mishnah, that if the blood is placed incorrectly, the bailim still get their kapara. My time, even though the dam reached the mizbeach in the wrong way, but once it's there, nischapru bailim. Ask the Gemara, if that's true, why can't you eat the basar? Amar kol lechaper lechapara nisativ. It's only good for the chapara, but below the davar acher. Says the Gemara, based on what you just said, Alma Kosavar, 6 lines down. Shleibim kaime kibe kaime dami. Sounds like Shmuel holds that the nesinas adam in the wrong place is like putting it in the right place. Klabe kapara. What's the kasha tanan? We learned in the Mishnah B'dach Pirkin. The next parak, Nasal Kavish like an agri side. Nasan is needing the Malamas and needing the Malamat, as in the Bifnim Bachos, as in the Bachos Bafnim. And what do we learn? If this is the lifeblood, if it's Dama Nefesh, if there's still some blood coming out of the animal, you should do Kabbalah again. Ask the Gemara, but wait, these are becoming Kaimai. Basically, you say that you just told me that clap the kapara, putting in the wrong place doesn't mess you up. Lamali, what is the reason? Why are you going to do it again? You got your kapara of a chitim. You're going to tell me lahater basar ba'achila. You know, you're doing it again. You're doing it again to allow you to eat the meat of the carbon. How could that be? It comes out that the second time you'd be doing the zrika, it's really a pointless zrika, but it's mattering the achilas habasar. How could that be? Says the Gemara, you're right. Idiyav kosher achanami. If the original nesina was done by a kosher, you're right. Hachabamayskina on the ave pasul. Talking about a case where the person who put on the blood was pasul. Says Gemara, so wait. If the one that put it there was pasul, and you're now telling me go and catch the blood. If there's dam nefesh, if there's splurting blood, and do it again. But why? The carbon should be dachay. The tanan v'kulich kiblu chutz l'zmani v'chutz l'mekaymai. Em yishtam l'nefesh yachzor hakosha v'kabel. Kiblu in zarkulai. But we see that's only if the zrika was not done yet. But once the zrika is done, the carbon should be disqualified and be dachay, should not be able to fix it. My time says Marloi. The pasul b'machshava. That's the reason, but it's not going to be dachui. Iachi kabbalah nami. V'oin mi pasul b'machshava amar Rabbi machshava mayelas. Ella says the Gemara, you're right. You know what the case is? B'mi sharayil avayda. U'bedavar harayil avayda. U'b'makam harayil avayda. We're talking about a case. Elamai, excuse me. It must be a case where it's all right. And yeah, what do we see? We see that we have the issues. Why by us are we going to allow it to happen? Says the Gemara, you're right. Loi tema zarku. Loi, don't be medayed into this zrika. It's going to be too late. Al ema shachtu loi. Say the Mishnah means that if a person who is pasul did the shchita, then loi. If he had the machshava zara while doing the shchita, then there's no way to fix it afterwards. Maika mashmlon, tepasal machshava, batanina. We already learned this. Lefika chen paisa machshava. Says the Gemara, you know what it teaches me? The machshava will not passel from Kabbalah ve'elach. The machshava only passels by the shchita, that by the Mishnah contrasting the case of a apostle who did the shchita, case of a apostle who did the Kabbalah, shows us that from the Kabbalah, from the Ketchup and onward, the thought process, your machshava will not passel it up. My taima kidirava, as Rava said, as we just saw. So an incredible chiddush that comes out, that we have a split in the Dalit Avaydais Ikarais, the four critical Avaydais. The Machshava Zara is only going to pass by the Shechita, not by the other three. Stop over here, I'll pick it up from here. B'siyata Tishmaya.